Okay, I'm live here. I'm really just going to make a quick video about, why is it important that we study the cell cycle? I know it's that time of year again, and here we are. We're studying these phases of mitosis. Prophase, prometaphase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase, followed by cytokinesis, of course. And the question is, why do we study this in biology? Why are we forced to memorize, these positions of a chromosome in a cell? I mean, isn't that kind of boring? Well, it turns out that the cell cycle is incredibly important. I mean, I don't know about you, but I was in high school one time and I had to learn the phases of mitosis, and I was like, come on, guys, this is boring. Why am I doing this? But let me give you some examples of why this is so important. It turns out that understanding the cell cycle is just incredibly important, and this is a hotbed of research that's going on right now. And I mean, we could do some pretty remarkable things just by understanding the cell cycle. So it turns out that to be a multicellular organism, we are made up of trillions of cells. I've heard anywhere from 10 trillion to 17 trillion. And another friend of mine one time said, no way, we're made up of more than 50 trillion cells. I mean, that's 50 with 12 zeros behind it, right? That's a lot of zeros. That's a lot of cells. And it turns out to be a multicellular organism, you got to control every one of those cells. You've got to control when do they grow, when do they stop growing, when do they divide, when do they die. It turns out we actually lose, I don't know, about 50 billion cells every single day of our life to make room for new ones. We're, of course, shedding skin cells, and we're shedding cells all of our epithelial cells. Those are the cells that line our body. So the skin and also the endothelial, the ones that from our mouth all the way out to our butt, all those cells in our esophagus, stomach, intestines are shed all the time because they die through a process called apoptosis, which is part of the cell cycle. Well, it turns out that, like I said, we have to just constantly control and regulate when these cells are growing and dividing. And if you think about it, once you stop growing, you maintain your body for the rest of your life. And that's an amazing feat that our cells are able to do, and our body's able to do through regulating the cells of the cell cycle. Also, we all started out when your dad's sperm fertilized your mom's egg, and that formed a zygote, a fertilized egg, basically, a single cell. We all started out as one cell, and we grew into an adult with these trillions of cells. So understanding the cell cycle is also important for understanding how cells or how a single-celled zygote grows and develops into an adult through cell differentiation. When do these cells grow? When do they divide? When do they die? I mean, if the cells didn't die, we would have webbing between our fingers, and that's because we're modified fish. And if we can figure out when to get cells to die, when to get them to reproduce, that means we could figure out things like, how do you repair tissue damage? So think of burn victims. If we could get their skin cells to regrow, or you have damaged organs from, you took too much Tylenol, or you drink too much and you get liver damage, or liver damage from other problems, or smoking causes lung damage, or heart diseases causes heart damage, or, of course, we're going to come back to this one, cancer. Cancer is this uncontrollable growth of cells that ultimately damages your organs, causing organ failure and death. Well, if we can learn how to get our cells to grow again in a controlled way, then we can repair tissues and damaged organs, or potentially even grow new organs, or how about new limbs? I mean, we haven't got there yet, but by studying the cell cycle, this is one way we do this, is we can study how to grow new limbs. And this is where I put my plug in for science. We got to learn to study salamanders. They can grow new limbs and we can't, and we're both tetrapods. So somebody needs to get on some salamander work and figure out why they're able to grow a foot back and we can't. And also, lastly, cancer. Cancer affects almost every single one of us at some point in our life. I mean, it's definitely affected people in my family, my grandparents, cousins, you name it. Cancers, and everybody has a story with cancer. Cancer is a term for a disease caused by the uncontrollable growth of cells. And there's over 100 different forms of cancer, and even what you might call breast cancer could be formed by different types of mutations. So even a similar form of cancer has many different causes, but they all have one thing in common: these cells are damaged. They have escaped the cell cycle, and they started growing uncontrollably. So these cells are our own cells, and they're mutated. And however they got to those mutations, that's for a different discussion here. But by understanding how cells are regulated, how they become damaged and lose that regulation, and how they become divided, start dividing uncontrollably, if we can understand those processes, then we can treat a lot of cancer cures. So one of my favorite examples is understanding, like if somebody gets cancer and they go on chemo, and you're like, oh man, they don't look good. They feel like crap. They're losing weight. They look pallid. Their skin doesn't look good. They lose their hair. Well, one of the ways that certain forms of chemo works is the chemo, the drugs actually target specific parts of the cell cycle. So, for example, Taxol, which was patented at Florida State University, and it comes from the bark of a yew tree out in California. That's pretty amazing. So, the way Taxol works is it prevents a cell from going from metaphase into anaphase, and it does that by preventing the microtubules. This is part of the cytoskeleton that moves all of these chromosomes around. Well, to go from metaphase into anaphase, you have to pull the chromosomes apart and start to separate them. And you do that by taking apart the microtubules at the kinetochores, which is part of what is involved with moving these things around. And the kinetochore is another really amazing thing that happens inside of cells in terms of how they work and get the cells to organize these chromosomes. But coming back to my point here is Taxol is a cancer drug that prevents the breakdown of microtubules. And as a result, the cell gets stuck in metaphase. And eventually, if it's stuck in metaphase, it dies. It'll actually commit apoptosis. So that's why understanding the cell cycle is so important, because, hey, I can stop this one thing and I can now treat certain forms of cancer. So if anybody's interested, going into medicine, this is a hotbed of research right here, studying the cell cycle. And in fact, people in our own department have gotten rather large grants to study specifically microtubule formation and cell division. Okay, well, I hope that this short video kind of helps you latch on as to why studying the cell cycle is so important. And next thing, you're sitting there looking at the positions of these chromosomes going prophase, prometaphase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, orophase. No, just kidding. That you realize that as these chromosomes move around the cell, that man, that is an incredibly choreographed set of events that the cell must undergo, and that, like I said, understanding how that works, we could potentially do a lot in terms of treating cancers if we understand what makes a cell divide, what stops a cell from dividing. Like I said, not only can we treat cancer, but we may be able to repair damaged tissues, organs, or even regrow them. So like I said, the cell cycle is incredibly important. Okay,